So today we're going to be working on the Mini. It's 2015 F56 Mini Cooper S. And we're going to be installing a rear sway bar from NM, as well as sway bar mounts and rear sway bar end links. So these are a couple different parts. I'll post links in the description. And in total, it's $500 bucks, about $500. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this jacked up. All right, so the car has been jacked up. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the lug bolts from the rear wheels. All right, so next we're going to remove the sway bar end link, which is right here from both sides. You can hold this with a T30 Torx while you loosen it up with a 16mm wrench. So that side's disconnected. We'll do the same on the other side. Okay, so take this cover off. And next I'm going to remove the bolts at the bottom of the coney. So this is an E20. Okay. And we're going to remove the lower part of this sway bar end link right here, which is down the bottom, and that's secured by an E10. But first, with this connected, we can pop our spring out of here. So pull our spring out, and we're going to remove this E10 bolt down here at the bottom of the sway bar end link. So now we've removed our strut, we've removed our sway bar, or sorry, our sway bar end link, both the bolt and the part that bolts into this, as well as removing our spring from the perch. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now we're under the vehicle. We have to remove this 10mm bolt. So I'm looking at the exhaust. Here's the back of the car. Exhaust. There's a 10mm bolt right there. And I also need to remove the 4 E14 that secure this rear subframe. So there's one here. There's one here behind that heat shield. One over here on the side. It's like right here, and then the same thing on this side over here. So we're going to remove those 4 E14 or external-torx bolts. So for these side ones, you're going to need a universal socket like this, because they're just, well, I mean, I guess you could remove this plastic guard, but it's much easier with the universal socket. Okay, and then last, now that we have the subframe lowered down, we can get at these bolts. So that was kind of the whole purpose of removing those giant E14 bolts, is to get at these E12 bolts that are right here, where my socket is. So there's 2, there's one on the top and one on the bottom, so we're going to get those removed. And that'll remove the factory retainers for the rear sway bar. This side I'm going to try to show it a little bit better. So we've got two bolts, one here and one up top. I'm using this little ratchet. So now we should be able to remove these mounts. There's a plastic cover. When you're pulling this out, you have to clear brake lines on both sides. So I think that it's important that you're careful of that. The brake lines there's like plastic clips that they can come out of, so you can get some space around them. And if you just work it, it'll come out. So there's our factory anti-sway bar. Here are our factory clamps that are plastic. And here is a factory sway bar end link. And we're going to be replacing that with this, which is not only much heavier, but also solid, while this is hollow. These are our new mounts, and these mounts have grease fittings on them so they can be greased. And the sway bar end links are adjustable. Now, NM is supposed to have them set to the proper height to begin with. So just make sure that our left and right both match. And NM does give you new hardware, new bolts to bolt these in, etc., to get everything mounted. It looks like I'm going to reuse the nut, the 16mm nut that comes off of here for these bolts, but the rest of the hardware is going to be new. So let's get this installed. So what we want to do is we want to slide this in through the car the same way the old one came out, taking care to go around the brake lines like we did. NM recommends that you leave the plastic on this so that you can slip it in. I don't have the plastic anymore, I already got rid of it. Okay, now I'm over to the point where I'm at the brake lines. I'm going to go over there and get behind the brake line. So right here, you can see the brake line. It's right here. I realize that it's a little dark. Let me grab a light. You see the brake line right here. My hand is on it. And this blue needs to be behind that. So there we slid past it. And now we can put it approximately where it goes. So this is the spot where our retainer bolts right here. You can see the two bolt holes for that. So let's get that installed next. All right. So we've got this approximately where it's going. We're going to take our cap, and this comes out of it, and this splits in half this way. So we're going to install it this way so that the Zerk faces backward so that we can actually get at it to grease it. And I don't even know how accessible it's going to be, but we'll see. We should put a little bit of grease on here to begin with. So we'll get that in here. So that is in place. There we have our cap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the bolts started on this cap. So like I mentioned, these new billet clamps come with these bolts. So all I'm going to do is get them started. Okay, so those are in now. So I want to do a couple things. One, I want to grease these zerks. Even though there's a little bit of grease in there, just give it a little bit more. And then secondly, I'm going to clean off this bar, the end of it, and clean my hands. Okay, so I have some all-purpose cleaner on a rag. Just going to clean the grease off the ends of this. I'm also going to snap the brake lines back into the retainers. There's white clips that are right here. So I think in order to get those brake lines snapped in, I'm going to have to start the bolts in the bottom of the subframe. So you should be able to see that from here. One of them goes right here, and the other one goes in the middle. So that's complete. I did snap the brake lines back into those white plastic pieces, and I did put the little 10mm bolt back in the heat shield. Now we're going to have to do some things like snap these brake lines back in. There's two on this side, one on the other. And then we can start reassembling the suspension. So the first thing that we probably want to do is connect the sway bar. Well, we probably want to put the spring in first, so the sway bar end link is not in the way. So let's do that first. So here are my springs. I'm going to push this down, and I think that it'll be get the top in, then we get the bottom in, and just make sure there's like a little rubber nub that needs to go in a hole in the bottom. Just make sure that that lines up the way it's supposed to. Now we can put our end links on, and these end links are well, the sway bar is adjustable. It's got two holes on it. Now from what I understand, this one is stiffer than stock, and this one's even stiffer than stock. So I'm going to start off here in the easier hole. So the recommendation is that you start with the rear hole, which is this one here. So it goes like this. We've got our spacers, thread down. We're going to use the factory bolt in the bottom, which should be this guy here. And then in the top, we're going to go through here. Okay, so we've got that started, and now we can tighten this bolt and nut. This nut was a 16mm. The new bolt has a hex. I think So that's nice and tight. And then last we need to reconnect our strut on this side, which is going to require putting a jack underneath it and jacking up this corner. Last but not least, we're going to connect the bottom of our strut using our E225 Okay, so this side is back together. We'll just go over it once, make sure everything looks tight. All these cables are snapped back into place. This is where it needs to be, bolted into place. And then we can put our wheel back on. Okay. And I can torque these when I lower it down. And now we'll go over the other side and finish that side up. Pull our jack stand out from under here as well. Okay, so over here, same thing. This is already bolted in. This is snapped into place. Our brake lines are snapped into their retainers. We'll grab the new sway bar end link. Get that E20 started and get it tightened down. And then we will use our new bolts through the back side into the rear of the sway bar. I'll have to let this down. So now we've got the sway bar end link bolted in tight. So all that leaves is this plastic cap, which I'm realizing right now I forgot on the other side. So I'll have to go back and snap that into place. That's okay, so we'll take it off the jacks and we will torque the lug nuts and we should be good to go. All right, so now that we're done, let's go over everything that we needed to complete this. So I haven't put any tools away yet. So first of all, spare parts when you're done. If you are replacing these caps with the billet caps and you are replacing the end links, this is what you'll end up with at the end. I have the factory rear sway bar. I have 2 end links that each have a bolt that's captured in them. I have 2 caps along with these 4 bolts and the rubber bushings. There are 2 extra NM bushings as well, because the sway bar comes with bushings and then the billet caps also come with bushings. For sockets, I ended up using a 10 mil for that, heat shield. I ended up using a 12 mil for the new bolts that bolt on the billet caps. And then these E-Torx sockets, I used a 10, a 12, a 14, and a 20. So the 20s are for the rear struts, the 14s are for the frame, the 12s are for the factory caps, these bolts here, and the 10s are for the factory sway bar end links. I did use a universal joint. I used a 6mm Allen for the new sway bar end link bolts, and a couple various extensions, 16mm wrench, etc. I will say probably the hardest part of the whole thing is when you're trying to put the back bolt in this, like the one that is closest to the front of the vehicle. When you're trying to get over this cap with your wrench and get it in, a single socket is too short, but a socket plus like a wobble or the shortest extension that I had was too long. Even a universal is too long. So I ended up settling on, I used a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch adapter with, it was the 12 when I was putting everything back together. And that created something that's about that length, which was like perfect along with my 1/4 inch ratchet. So that's really it. You need jack stands, you need a floor jack. I have 3 floor jacks. Really, you just need one. You can lift the car up, you can put jack stands underneath it, and then you could use the floor jack to manipulate the suspension in the back while you've got it up on the jack stands. I left mine on these with the jack stands underneath as well, just because it's easier. I have 3 jacks, so I didn't really need to use, I didn't need to take them out, move them around. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to torque these wheel nuts, and then we'll take it for a ride. Alright, so those have all been torqued down. One thing that you might have noticed is I'm using this, it's like a 1/16 inch sheet of sheet metal, and I'm using that for the jack. So the jack actually rolls really nicely on it, and it doesn't cause the Swiss tracks to flex or distort in any way. So I would say that's a nice thing. If you have Swiss tracks, I picked 2 of these up at Lowe's. I think they were like $20 a piece, and they are 24 by 30 Hillman Group 26 gauge. So